Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Courageous Curiosity Podcast. I'm Superintendent Ben Mainka here for the Novi Community School District, and today's show is going to be awesome. So we are joined by professionals in the field of journalism and media. We have a Pulitzer Prize winning author, we have a journalist, and we have some students who work for the Free Press as well as our own Cat's Eye News and work in our news production. And the whole question for today is, why has trust in the media diminished? And kind of a sub-question to that is, where are we going to get our information now? Where are we going to get our information in news? And then what can we tell young people about how to analyze different news sources? So I'm excited about the conversation today. Really grateful for the people that have chosen to come be a part of this conversation. And so I want each of you to just share a little bit about your background and kind of how you come to this place. And so we have two students with us today. We'll start with them. Just share a little bit about your background. And so Clara, we'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Clara Polonsky. I've been in the Cat's Eye News broadcast class for 3 years now. And so I make a bunch of like news announcements and news stories for that. And then I'm also our district's communications supervisor. I'm his work-based learner. So
what people might not know is that you actually produce this show, which is really, really cool. And it's great to have you on the screen and on the show today. And also somebody who's not new to news and journalism. We have our very own Rebecca Borlace. So share a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so like Mr. Mainka said, my name is Rebecca Borlace, and I'm a senior at Novi High School. I've been a guest writer with the Wildcat Roar for coming up on 3 years now. And I recently this summer apprenticed at the Detroit Free Press as a part of their summer apprenticeship program. And it was there that I learned a lot about how journalism works in a more professional setting, and being able to actually go out into Detroit and speak to a lot of really cool people. But yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. And what a great program. And we have people in our community that I know have seen some of your work for the Free Press. You're doing an amazing job. And somebody who is not new to the Free Press, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Share a little bit about yourself, Mr. M.L. Elrick.
Sure. Yeah, I thought Rebecca looked familiar.
Yeah.
I started my first newspaper in the 5th grade and then went on to work in the middle school paper and the high school paper and delivered the newspaper and worked in my college paper, and I've worked in just about every capacity of media there is. In fact, I worked with Chris before at WJR. And I just think that it's a great way to inform people, to tell people stories, and it's a lot of fun as a profession, even though we're under a lot of fire these days, because you don't sit in an office all day. You go get to meet people, you go get to see things, and you get to experience things that other people don't get to see for themselves, and you get to bring those experiences back to them. So it's a great way to make a living. It's an honorable calling, and we just need to try and make sure that we don't lose people's faith, because we are the truth tellers, and if they don't want to believe the truth and they don't want to listen to us, then I think our democracy's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Super important question. Do you still have a copy of your 5th grade newspaper that you wrote?
The Weekly Chronicle, yes, we do. We used to produce it on...
he still writes for it. What are you talking about? Yeah.
It's still 5 cents a week, by the way, which is almost as cheap as a Free Press. I think a subscription is 10 cents a month. I don't know.
It's amazing.
I don't know how we're paying the bills.
Exactly.
No, we've kept a few copies.
Well, we're also fortunate to be joined by Chris Renwick. I know you've worked in a variety of media as well, but another cool thing is you used to go to this high school. You're a product
of my alma mater. Yeah,
awesome.
This is where I caught the bug in this room.
That's amazing.
Mr. Legg back then was a great broadcast teacher. Yeah, I think for me, my focus has always been radio. When I was in the TV studio just down the hall here, I got some sage advice, and it was, you're not cut for TV. So make radio your thing. So I did. It was good advice. And I've taken the approach, for me, because I'm a little on the younger side. I graduated in Novi 2007. And I took the advice of really working your way up. So I've worked in really tiny, small markets. I worked at a radio station down in Adrian, WLEN, which is a wonderful radio station. Really great people, really professional people, but it's a small town.
Sure.
The radio station was actually in an old bowling alley that they converted into a radio station. So I've kind of run the gamut on the radio business here in the state of Michigan, and I've worked in our newsroom. I've worked with really high-end news thinkers and people that journalism is a very sacred thing. And what I do now is a little different when I host JR Afternoon. It's a lot of opinion, but it's all fact-based. It's all, here's the information, here's what I think about it, what do you think about it? So a little bit of a different form of media, but I think ML's exactly right. I think if we continue on this path of losing people's faith in our journalistic institutions, it's a really bad place to be, because we need a well-informed people.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of take that theme and run with it a little bit, and maybe for the two of you to kind of kick this conversation off. I mean, media can encompass print, TV, news, a variety, social media. How do you think people should be distinguishing true news or like a trusted information source versus maybe entertainment, or is there a differentiation? Because it seems like the lines have been blurred a little bit, and maybe people aren't even sure what's the difference. If I turn on a particular cable news show, I might be actually watching more entertainment than news, right? And so it's interesting to kind of hear your perspective on how do you differentiate between the two?
Well, I mean, I think for me, the 24-hour news cycle is it needs to constantly be fed. It's like a fire. It's like if you don't keep putting wood on the fire, it's going to go out. Well, that's not what they want.
Right.
So you have to continue to feed the beast. And I think the blurring of the lines is not only on television, but it's seeped over into written news stories on their websites. One of the things that Dick Hafner at WJR taught me, and I learned a really valuable lesson, is just the words that you use in stories can add color when there doesn't need to be, or when there shouldn't be. When it's not even malicious. It's not an attempt to skew a story or steer a story a different way. But you have to be very mindful of the words that you use when describing something. And I think that's where a lot of the blurred lines come in, where if you're a family of four, family of five, and you go to work 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, you come home, you have dinner, you try to hang out with your family, and then you try to get caught up in the world, you're not necessarily thinking of the minutia. You're not thinking of those ways that stories can be changed in certain ways. So I think for a lot of people, it's the grind of every day while trying to balance that gathering of information.
Absolutely.
My biggest concern is, and I think almost everything meets a definition of news. If you watch TMZ and you find out that Taylor Swift missed her flight, and so now she's got to take a bus, that's news. It's just not news that I think really is that interesting or that important, but to other people, it really is. My biggest concern is that we've seen the cable news networks realize it's very profitable to basically cater to people's political perspectives. And I remember when CNN started, they had a show called Crossfire, and you'd have the conservative commentator and the liberal commentator. And you might agree with one or the other, but you had to hear the other person's perspective. And now we don't really get that. Now even CNN, which tries to be balanced, when you watch them, there tends to be three sort of on the left people and one person on the right. I always feel sorry for that guy waiting to get his word in there.
They rolled him out there.
But yeah, we seem to be getting away from the fact-based thing where I can point to something and say, this is true, this is why I know it. And I guess I'm going to blame people because we give them what they want, and those stations are profitable and they get ratings because people want that. And my biggest concern, and the thing that I've really seen over the last decade, is what's true in people's minds seems to line up with what they want to be true. So Donald Trump won this election, and we haven't seen a lot of protests about the election being stolen because the people who normally protest elections are stolen won. So they're not doing it. I happen to think that 2016, 2020, and 2024 were all fair, free, and accurate elections. And we've kind of become a country of sore losers. And so, I don't want to let Chris and I off the hook as people who deliver the news, but I think some of it is incumbent on consumers to say that sometimes things happen that I don't like, but it doesn't mean they're not true.
Yeah.
And everybody's perspective of the world is a little different, right? And that shades into the politics and how you think the world should be run or the country should be run. And I think you're exactly right. But people's perspectives also influence how they gather that information or where they go to get that information.
Right, and I think you see that in social media, right?
No doubt.
It's like I don't necessarily follow people, or if they're saying things that I disagree with, then what do? I unfollow them, which is the antithesis of the crossfire situation you're talking about. So now I'm not having diversity of ideas and thought being exposed to me. So I seem to believe that truth is only from the sources that I'm seeking out, right? And so that's super interesting. And I wonder, as we kind of shifted that conversation a little bit around social media, for young people, for you two, how does the average young person, a high school student, a college student, how do you think they're consuming or getting information and news? And how do they look for trusted sources?
Yeah, I feel like honestly, I see the vast majority of the news that I see just scrolling through people's Instagram stories. And it's a very specific set of news, though, because when something has or wants to go viral on a social media platform like Instagram, they start to sensationalize every single headline, because if you don't have a catchy one-line sentence in the title of your post, it is not going to be reposted onto people's stories. It's not going to be proliferated around to other young people. And I feel like as a student, especially one in high school, it's like a very formative time in your life. You want to be liked by the people around you, but sometimes it's like this little debate where you see a lot of people who are very open with their political opinions, a lot of people who aren't. And it's really easy to just take a look at someone's social media account and decide that you don't share the same views that I do, especially when all they're reposting is a bunch of sensationalized media. It's kind of hard to find a completely objective source off of social media, especially when you see a lot of people who you like and you see their political opinions and you start to drift towards them because, like you want to be like them, you want to move a little bit closer to them, and that is going to be a lot harder if there is this huge political divide between you and them. Or even just like my YouTube recommended list for a lot of like actual broadcast media on YouTube, I get recommended headlines like Melania Trump turns down Jill Biden's invite to tea time or something like that. I'm not hearing about any sort of humanitarian crisis that's happening in the world. I'm not hearing about any like Project 2025 plans outside of even just YouTube ads, something that I'm forced to listen to right before getting to the video I actually want to watch.
Well, and those algorithms are worked on in the background sometimes.
There's something fierce, man.
Yeah,
those algorithms.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And it's like almost if I watch something that I'm going to just continue. So to your point, you're kind of feeding that beast, right, of each person. Claire, what do you think?
I think for me, whenever I do turn on like the TV or like mainstream media, it feels very violent and like politically extreme. And so that ends up giving me like a lot of anxiety, and it like pushes me away from that. So, but then like the only news I'm getting is from social media, which is algorithm based and biased, and so it's really hard to figure out like, okay, yes, I believe this, but do I only believe this because those are the videos I've seen on social media? So.
Do you find that in both of your professional opinions, social media has to have been a game changer in terms of how people are consuming news? Because I think some people assume that what they read is true, and there's very little like checks of, oh no.
I think the game changer for me at least is, and it's all a grain of salt, right? But you are kind of seeing in real time what people are, what they're thinking of things or how they're reacting to a certain story. it doesn't necessarily color the way that I build a show or color the way that I deliver my information. And again, I'm kind of a skeptic at heart. So for me, I don't really ever take at face value of anything I see on social media. But it's an interesting way of getting information. Like, whenever ML says something, whenever ML puts something out, I listen, I read, because I trust ML.
Right.
Because I know what ML's chemical makeup is. I know what his career makeup is. He doesn't have an agenda.
Yep.
It's facts. It's black and white. And so I think for the gathering of information from trusted sources, social media is really great. And then you get that kind of real-time feedback. Again, grain of salt, but you get that real-time feedback from people that are interacting with stories.
Yeah, I mean, as an investigative reporter, I like social media because that's usually where people get themselves in trouble.
Yeah.
When they say, well, I was actually at a funeral on Saturday, so I missed the big vote at the end of the legislative session. And then you look on social media and you see they're in Chicago and saying, boy, these wings are spicy. Like, I don't think that's what they were serving at the funeral.
Right. Exactly.
So it's very useful to me. But journalism has always tried to cater to its audience. There was a movement that was really big about 30 years ago called civic journalism, where we would ask people, what do you want to know? And we're going to tell you stories about what you're interested in. And I thought that's a fine thing. You really do want to give the people what they want because we are in a business and we do want to serve our customers. But the problem with a lot of this is if you don't have reporters doing the work, aren't spending the time where the stories happen, people don't know that Kwame Kilpatrick is sending corrupt text messages and giving contracts to his best friend. They don't know to say, I want more of that, because they don't know that it exists. So at some point, we actually have to find things and bring them into the marketplace and see what happens with them. And if social media, I mean, Chris works with ratings. When I was in TV, we worked with ratings. They used to give you rating books that you'd fill out. Well, now they have people meters where they can tell what you're changing the channel on or what station you're flipping to almost as soon as it happens.
How long you're listening.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
exactly. What's your retention rate? We have the same thing with people, eyeballs on stories. Social media is kind of an informal rating service where if you put something out there and somebody says, well, I don't want to read about Project 2025. Nobody looks at it. But somebody says, well, there's a car crash on Taft Road. 2 students were hurt and the car's upside down. Everybody's reading it. That's what people are going to go to. We kind of direct the news by our interest. And those algorithms, while we blame them, we're partly responsible because they're based on what we look at. In my podcast, here's a free plug, ML Soul of Detroit.
Yeah.
We have insertion ads that are put there by our hosting service. And I'll have people say, why are you playing that ad? I'm like, that ad doesn't play for me because it's based on what you like.
Okay.
And so the hosting service says, play something for them about a credit union because they've been online looking for loans. For me, it might say, play something for them about concert tickets because you've been looking to see about resale tickets to whatever show downtown. So we kind of have created the monster and we're ultimately responsible. If you see something crazy out there and you don't do a little digging yourself, you're kind of allowing yourself to be duped.
Yeah.
It's, you can't get strong without working out.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I may add.
Yeah.
I think to your point about like journalism starting to kind of cater to audiences. So what I find really interesting about like the communications field as a whole is like there's 2 parts. There's like marketing and journalism. And so journalism, ideally the purpose is to inform your audience and make sure your audience is informed. Whereas marketing, I'd say the purpose is to like convince your audience to like get your message across. And I think especially in recent years, marketing is starting to like leak into journalism. Like I saw this, so I got the opportunity to shadow someone from World Wildlife Fund during the United Nations negotiations for the new plastics treaty in Ottawa. And so in those negotiations, World Wildlife Fund isn't actually in the UN or negotiating, but they're what's called a stakeholder, and they're trying to talk to these negotiators and market towards them. But there's also other people trying to market towards them, and they're marketing towards these negotiators and also the journalists who are there. And so it's whoever markets to the journalists best. And at that point, it's up to the journalists to keep journalistic integrity and make sure that they don't have a one-sided story or a biased view.
Yeah, I think really a lot of what you're talking about with marketing, I can see reflected in like social media being marketed towards younger teens, because you see the kind of posts that appeal to high schoolers, and they're formatted a very specific way. They have bright colors, something dramatic happening in the background, maybe an explosion or two. But you'll see, like, it's just also because the bar to post something on social media is so low and then gain a massive following. I find it personally hard to trust a lot of what I see through social media as a truly objective source, especially with how easily facts and statistics can be manipulated to highlight different aspects in everything. I feel like, especially with what Clara was talking about with marketing being like bleeding into true journalism, it's hard to keep track of everything that's happening at once. And it feels like everything that I'm seeing is being catered specifically to keep me reading and watching, which is what I'm sure both of you struggle a lot with, how to keep people engaged with your content, especially with shortened attention spans and everything. It's just sometimes, I'll see something and because of my lowered trust, I'll hear a red flag in a commentator and I'll think, oh, you're not actually that objective, are you? So I'll instantly click away, right? Because now that this news source's image has been tainted to me, there's no reason for me to continue watching or reading or listening. It's just not worth my time.
Well, that gets back to some of the things you were talking about, Chris, with the words you use can even change that algorithm and it makes it so you're going to click away. But where did you learn that? I mean, you use the word skepticism. I'm a natural skeptic. It seems like that's a skill that maybe all of us should have whenever we're consuming any kind of media. Did you learn that somewhere, or is that just something that inherently you find yourself having a bit of skepticism?
Well, I mean, for me personally, I think a lot of it comes from the environment that I grew up in. Both of my parents taught me from a very young age not to really trust, if I'm being perfectly honest, mainstream media with my full opinion, because we see huge scandals like Kwame Kilpatrick, or I got like the biggest example I'm sure every high school student's heard of, Watergate. You know what I mean? Like there is a distrust in the government, and then I feel like some of like that taught distrust towards the government is bleeding into, can I believe everything that I'm hearing about the government, and slowly transferring its way in.
Yeah, and that didn't used to be the case. I mean, even when we were growing up, there was the newsman on ABC, and there was no reason for us to suspect there was a slant to it.
Was it Walter Cronkite who broke the JFK story? Was it Cronkite?
Yeah.
I mean, you just had a president of the United States shot in the head, killed instantly, and if you watch that broadcast, it's not salacious. It's not meant to make the situation bigger. It was, the president's been shot, and it was a beat. It was a moment of almost reflection for him, but it wasn't. If that happens today, I mean, it's wall-to-wall coverage for 72 hours, and right. I mean, it turns into a bit of a circus. Not that it doesn't justify it, but you see kind of the eras and the difference in the way that you approach really big stories. And then you report on it, you move on, and you talk about what's next. It's not quite like that anymore.
Sure.
But if you look at the Cronkite announcing JFK's assassination, they got a tip. I think Dan Rather called it in, and they're like, well, we need to have two sources before we announce this. They needed to be first, but they needed to be right. And I wonder how they would have handled that back in 1962 if there was a website that said alien kills president, right. And all of a sudden that's the number one website where he's like, why did the aliens want to kill the president? Because he wants to go to the moon and find their secret base? Yeah. And if that was the leading website, I think Walter Cronkite would have come on and said, we can't rule out the aliens were involved in the death of the president. There's so much competition right now, and people are catering to slices of the market. Joe Rogan was a bit player on a mid-level TV show 20 years ago, and now he's the biggest podcaster in the world because he found a mix of different things that appeal to people. And so he's created this huge audience, and the media has fractured. And so if somebody finds something that people gravitate towards too, there's kind of a herd mentality. People run towards that. And again, I'm not here to tell everybody it's their fault, but, they sell cornflakes and they sell Frosted Flakes. And they sell more Frosted Flakes because people like sugar. So don't complain that Frosted Flakes aren't good for you if you're buying them.
Yeah.
Have some bran flakes like I did because I'm old. That's the other reason I was late, folks. I don't want to tell you too much.
That
But I'm regular as hell.
To a question, do you guys think the media market is a little bit oversaturated now? Because I'm hearing things like Joe Rogan and trying to appeal to an audience, but it sounded like from when you guys were entering the market, it was a lot harder to become a journalist, and it seemed like the barriers in place were a lot higher than they are now.
Well, I'm older, so maybe I'll start with that. I mean, I think there were more places to work in traditional media when I was graduating. Now there are more places to work because there's so many different definitions of media. And I think really what's changed is who calls themselves a journalist and who we trust as a journalist. So I think Joe Rogan's an entertainer, and I think he brings some information forward, but nobody's
It's at least a
scrutinizing
dialogue. It's at least a place to discuss, right? And there are many times when they, whoever he's got on, they disagree, but it's a conversation, which I think is something that we lose a little bit too.
And the other thing is, if Chris says something inappropriate on the air, there's a problem.
Never.
WJR's license may be in question. If I'm working in broadcast and we show something that is in poor taste or maybe offensive, our station has to answer to protect their license. But you can film an execution and live stream it on Facebook or X. You can have a suicide on there. You can have sexuality, whatever you want on social media. There's no regulation. They face no consequences for that. And in some ways that gives them an advantage in the marketplace, but it also diminishes the very broadcast technology we have, the airwaves. Why do TV stations, radio stations have to pass such rigorous tests, but social media can put any garbage they want out there and there's no consequences? We need to do something about it.
And I think a lot of it too is I think it's building trust, right? ML has built trust with his audience in various platforms,
And they're old and dying.
well, but like for me, I'm always very forthright with my audience. That I'm getting you home. I'm trying to get you home to your family, to your wife, your husband. We're gonna have a little fun. I'll give you my opinions. I want to hear yours. I want to talk about things. And I think that accountability is lost on a lot of these outlets. If they were honest, you're not a news outlet.
Yeah.
You're not a news station. You're an opinion entertainment destination, and that's okay. But you have to be honest with people, because if you masquerade under the umbrella of news or under the umbrella of journalism and you bring something different to the table, I think you're doing a disservice to your audience. I think you're doing a disservice to real information, and at the end of the day, nobody's better off. It's empty calories. It's the frosted flakes.
The Frosted Flakes.
They're
Absolutely.
great. Maybe not
and everybody
great
knows that
for
slogan,
you.
right?
Yeah.
I do think as we're starting to kind of wind down, one of the things that can't be lost in this whole conversation is that true journalism, and ML, your career has been based on investigative journalism, but true journalism is historically an important public good, right? Like we somewhat as a society must rely on people to do that work well so that we can have an informed public. What are the things that we need to be mindful of as we think about, okay, we can't lose sight. I mean, you mentioned when ML puts something out there, he's a trusted source. What are some practical tips for people to be able to consume things in a way that says this is somebody, and I think maybe on the concept of the licensing is an interesting take too, but this is somebody that I can trust. This is somebody that's doing this for the public good. It's a service versus entertainment.
I think it's a lot of just you have to not be. You can't be narrow-minded in where you go for news. I think you have to be pretty vast and pretty broad in where you look for news. And I think that if Donald Trump appoint somebody to a position. Read about it over here, read about it over there, check over here, and maybe you'll find commonalities in a lot of those stories. It's probably decent information. And then there's going to be things that you don't find that are all the same in those stories. So I think for me, it's a diversification of those outlets and making sure that eventually you'll find those trusted people. You will. It's hard, but they're there. That you'll find them.
Sure.
I think that's true. You have to listen to many voices, but I think when you find voices and sources that you trust, you have to support them. So I always get frustrated when people say, there are no stores open on Main Street, and then there's 6 Amazon packages on their front porch. That's your fault.
Yeah.
You know, if you want that store around the corner to be in business, you have to patronize it. So when you find something you trust, when you find somebody you trust, you have to get behind them, because otherwise they're going to go away.
Yeah, it's really driven by who is consuming that source, and you want to consume from people that are trustworthy. So as we kind of close out, do the two of you have anything you want to share for young people thinking about, how they consume media, where to find it, or just maybe some things to be thinking about as a young person trying to enter into this crazy space?
Yeah, it really is a crazy space. I'd say just like have discernment and try to have wisdom. If you see something, say that's like on social media, maybe like, okay, this might not be the best source, like, and double check your facts, and definitely double check your facts before you like get into a debate with someone or something like that. So yeah, I just say having discernment.
Yeah, I feel like also a large part of it is just you have to care. Like, it is so easy now to be hit with this barrage of awful thing after awful thing that I feel like a lot of young people, especially nowadays, are growing up to be desensitized to a level, because that's sort of the only way that you're able to get through being a functional person, trying to grow up into a functional adult, while still seeing all of these horrible things that are happening in the world. So the biggest thing is just making sure that you aren't caught up in this loop of, well, there's nothing I can do, I'm just a kid. You have to stay informed. You have to educate yourself so that when the time comes that you are old enough and ready to use your voice in an election to continue lobbying and campaigning, and even then a lot of young people now are getting into that, you have to have the skills and the knowledge background in the back of your mind. And that's something that school is useful for, which is why I'm so glad this is a topic being covered on the podcast today. But yeah, you got to care.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. And for both of you, I know that you have your own shows. I would love for you to be the people that would watch this show. I think they're going to be interested. If they haven't been following you, I'd love them to know where they can find you. I know you mentioned Soul Detroit, but I'd like to give any final thoughts and then maybe an opportunity to plug your own work so that people can go and find you.
Sure. So I'm at the Free Press. You can find my work at freep.com. Most of it is behind a paywall, so you have to subscribe to read it, but it's 10 cents a month, so that's really not that high a barrier to entry. My podcast is ML Soul of Detroit. You can listen to us every Tuesday. I also teach journalism at Michigan State, and I run a student investigative reporting program where hopefully some of you guys, when you graduate, will want to work with us, because I do think that Rebecca's absolutely right. You guys have the responsibility to do some of this work. To say that we have no power is basically robbing yourself of the power that you do have, because I'll be gone in 20 years, and it's up to you guys. So if you just wait for us old guys to do it, then we're going to have a lot of restaurants that close by 5 o'clock, and you guys are going to say, what the hell?
I think from a historical perspective, there's always been a slant in the media, right? I mean, you go all the way back to Thomas Jefferson and John Adams running, and they were slandering each other in the papers, and they were covering it, right? It's kind of the easy example because of Hamilton. But I think that when we have young people engaged, it makes a huge difference. When you want to know more, when you want to be involved, when you want to be informed, that's really half the battle. And I think for a lot of people, it's making sure that you find people that you trust and supporting them. So I agree. I think it's a great point. I host JR Afternoon with Chris Renwick from 2 to 4 on WJR every day. we talk about everything. We don't shy away from any major issue, any controversial issue. We try to have fun. Yesterday we talked a lot about how I want to see Mike Tyson flatline Jake Paul. So
Sure.
we cover everything.
Sure.
2 to 4 on WJR every day.
That's awesome. Well, thank the four of you for being here. Incredible human beings that are here to share immense wisdom. We hope that all of you that watch the show had something that you can take away from it, and I hope everybody here stays curious. Have a great day.